Hey everyone, welcome back to another Excel Better video. And in this video, I want to show how you can modify SUMIFs and COUNTIFs to be able to actually include multiple criteria within the same formula. So really by default for a lot of these things, if you actually have just one criteria section, you can't necessarily have multiple criteria without kind of using the method that I'm going to cover in this video. I find it to be really helpful, so I kind of want to walk through the motivation behind it, some other ways you'd get around it, and then ultimately, again, the solution for you, how you can do that. So first of all, when we're talking about this, if we're going to use just a normal sum if, so I can start this, and let's say that we're starting our sum if, and we want to just get, the total tax revenue from our table over here just for the state of Michigan. So if we want to do a sum if, that would be pretty easy in this case. We could just start out with our range. So we're looking at the states here, and then we're going to have our criteria just be Michigan. So we're going to point that there. And then we have our sum range, which is this tax revenue column here. We're going to hit enter, and that's going to give us 1,559, which we could quickly check by going over here and finding out that the only two occurrences of Michigan on this table here do in fact add up to 1559. We can see in the lower right hand corner. So this formula checks out. But then the question would be, okay, but what if you actually wanted to sum this up based on multiple states? What if you wanted this to be based on Michigan and Texas and California, for example? So let's say there's actually three conditions here. Now there are different ways that you can go about this. You could actually, and just for clarity, I'm actually going to type out Michigan. So if you put that in quotes like this, it'll work the same way, but you have a little bit more flexibility with being able to actually include this as a reference. But this will be a little bit more clear here. So if I'm actually going to use the sum if, we could actually just paste this in and change this to Texas, and add another one for California. There we go. We can do our same check. We can say, okay, we're going to add up all of Michigan and California and Texas. So that should add up to 5252, which we see in the lower right hand corner once again. And that is the answer that we get. So we can go about it in this way. But there's, a shorter way, a more concise way to do this. And it was also, if we actually had, let's say, 30 criteria, or if you had of all the states, so you had 30 different states that you wanted to include in this, instead of actually adding up each of these one at a time, again, there's a simpler way. So I wanted to kind of cover what that would look like. So what you could do is actually just... So we're going to recreate our sum if. We're going to highlight our states once again. So that part is still the same. But now with the criteria, instead of only pointing this at Michigan like we did before, so only at B3, we're actually going to highlight the entire range here from Michigan, Texas, and California. So B3 to B5. And then we're going to put in the sum range just like we had before as well. So now the only thing that we're changing is we're actually putting in a range for the criteria. And if we close this, what we see is the result that it produces, or the result that it's displaying, is 0. Now, of course, we understand that that's not the answer that we want, but we're one step closer to getting there by being able to do that. And what we need to do now is kind of understand why this is showing us 0. And if we do that, there's a nice shortcut here that if we highlight this whole formula, and we hit F9, it's actually going to show us kind of like, behind the scenes what's going on here. And by highlighting the whole thing, we can see that this, even though it's displaying 0, is actually giving us what is called an array. And it's giving us, which is essentially just a list in this case, but it's giving us a list of results. And the list of results are the 1559, which is the sum of Michigan, which is the first one. The next one is Texas, so we have our 970. And then the third one is the sum of California, which is the 2,723. which would be the sum of the range here. But so what we want to do is not just actually display this array or just have it output to 0. We want to actually be able to sum each of these 3 numbers, okay? But if we're going to do that, we could just come out front here and say sum and hit enter. But that's still going to give us an answer or an output of 0. And that's giving you an output of 0 because, again, when we're looking at the numbers the way that they were, so if we hit undo and look at our SUMIF again, this again is giving us an array of numbers, or that list of numbers. So because it's giving us an array and we're trying to sum an array, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to actually enter this as an array formula. So we do that by when we actually have this typed out in this way. So again, we're trying to sum essentially an output that is an array or a list. And we tell Excel that we're trying to sum an array or work with an array by clicking into the formula bar like we are, holding Control-Shift and hit enter, and then it'll put these little brackets on the end of it. They encase our formula in brackets, which tells Excel again that we're working with an array. So we're summing an array. And now we get the answer of 5,252. And again, it's not only shorter than what we had earlier by just adding multiple SUMIFs together, or SUMIF, formulas together, but, it's also much more efficient if we were going to have a very large list of criteria. Again, if you have a list of 30 criteria, like we talked about earlier, if you have that, it's just much easier to be able to point that criteria, at a particular list somewhere in a file like we would have here. It's much easier doing that than it would be to actually have 30 different SUMIF formulas that you're working with. Okay, so that's the way it would work with SUMIF. I also want to show you how it would work with COUNTIF. So same concept really for the most part. So, if we actually wanted to be able to, let's say, count the occurrences of, when Michigan's showing up in this list and when Texas and California are, if we just wanted a total count of how many times Michigan, Texas, and California are in this list, we can use the COUNTIF with the multiple criteria, and then again, sum that array, put that in brackets with our Control-Shift-Enter, and then it's going to actually sum the COUNTIF portion of that. So I can walk through and show you what that would look like as well. So let's do this. We're going to leave this here as the SUMIF. Let's come down here and use our COUNTIF. So we're going to say equals COUNTIF. Now in this case, we don't have to worry about the actual sum range. So all we're going to have is the actual range where we want to count, and our criteria, which is up here. We're going to go ahead, close that, hit enter. Once again, the output is 0. Once again, that output is 0, and it's 0 because this is an array. So if we actually use F9 again, we actually see that this is actually telling us that we have 2, 1, and 4. And what does that exactly mean, right? Well, again, given that this is a COUNTIF, it's going in order, and it's really giving us that count by saying that Michigan is showing up in this list twice, which we see in the first 2 states in the list here. Texas is next, which only shows up once, and then California is the 3rd criteria here, and that's showing up 1, 2, 3, 4, which correlates back to this. So in total, we know that we have 2 Michigans, 4 Californias, and 1 Texas. So we'd be able to look at this and say that the answer to this should be 7, but it's actually showing us a 0. Well, that's again because we need to sum this array. So if we go ahead and sum this, put that in quotes here, and before we hit enter, which is key, because again, just as that reminder, same thing for SUMIF, same thing with COUNTIF. If we actually just go ahead and hit enter right now, the output is 0. And that can be, a little confusing to think, well, wait a minute, I'm summing this array, why doesn't this work? But you need to remember that if you don't actually hold down Control-Shift and enter, you would need to remember to go back into the formula bar here, and then follow that step of Control-Shift-Enter, like so, and then you get your answer of 7, which once again is letting you know that Michigan is showing up twice, plus California 4 times, plus Texas once. So there you have it. If you're working with COUNTIF, and if you're working with SUMIF and you need multiple criteria and you want to be able to have that in one concise, simple formula, you can just use the concept of arrays and really just realizing that you're summing an array. You want to be able to enter that ultimately with Control-Shift-Enter, and that's going to give you your desired output. So thanks again for following along on another video. Once again, if you found this useful or you're interested in, consuming more Excel content in the future, go ahead and hit subscribe. But thanks for watching.